Well, hey, good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? As you have heard, it is football season. It is here, right? Here we go. We are ready for some football. I pray that your team does great this year, unless they're playing my team, all right? That's what we're going to pray for as this year begins. Speaking of football, many of you probably grew up like I did, playing backyard football with your friends every single Sunday, well, not every single Sunday, but most Sunday afternoons in the fall. There was a group of guys from my church and some friends from the local neighborhood. We would meet up at our church because we had this huge field there, and we would play two-hand touch football for a couple of hours and go back home and finish watching the games. Now, if you grew up doing that, you remember how the offense used to work, right? This was your playbook. It was the hand. And the quarterback would get in the little huddle with the little offensive guys and say, all right, here's the deal, guys. Here's the play we're going to run. Chad, I want you on the left side. I want you to run up 5 yards and cut right across the middle of the field. Alan, you're on the right side. You run up 5 yards. I want you to cut left right over the middle of the field. We're going to do the crisscross pattern. Probably the greatest play in any backyard football game ever, because it was basically the only play anybody could run. But if you remember those days, it never really turned out quite the way you hoped it would. That what you were hoping was the two defenders would knock into each other, but usually it was the two wide receivers, the two guys on offense, who would run into each other and cause chaos for that particular play. But every play you ran, this was your playbook. This is where the plays were laid out for your team. Maybe you graduated. You went to youth football, maybe middle school, high school, college, pros, whatever it may have been. But as you get away from backyard football into organized football, you actually got a playbook. Many times this is a notebook. This got a lot of pages in it. As you kind of progress, especially in today's world, you have tablets or iPads that have your plays on it. But back in the day, they'd give you this notebook with these plays. And the notebook that was given to you wasn't so you could just look at it and like, oh, look at all the pretty designs in this book. It wasn't, hey, go memorize these, and that's it. Your coach would give this to you, say, hey, go memorize these, learn these, so when it's time for you to get on the field to play, you know exactly what we are going to do. Today, we are starting a brand new series called Playbook. And as you've heard this morning, this series is all about the book of James. James is in the New Testament. James is actually one of my favorite books in the Bible. In fact, a lot of people will ask me, like, hey, Chad, I want to read the Bible. Where should I start? What are some good places to begin? What are some books I should read? I don't want to read all 66 in a row. I'm like, that's a great idea. Let's start off small. I say Genesis. It's the introduction, right? It's the beginning. And it really sets the stage for everything else you're going to read in the Bible. Then I say, go to one of the Gospels. Find one of these biographies of Jesus and read one of those. My favorites are John and Luke. So read one of those. And then I always say, like, after you read that, you have an understanding of who Jesus is, go read James, because James really is about how to live a Christian life. Or, as we say here, it's this playbook that prepares us for the game of life. Now, I'm going to explain this series a little bit more in just a moment because it fits better. I actually want to begin this series giving an overview of the book of James. Sometimes people ask, like, who wrote James? I'm going to make it easy. It was James, okay? We're pretty sure it was actually the half-brother of Jesus, whose name was James. Kind of interesting. James didn't believe his brother was the Messiah until after Jesus died and resurrected. I don't know if we can blame him, because they grew up together, right? I kind of imagine it this way. Let's say an interviewer comes up to James later on and is like, so what was it like growing up with Jesus? And I hear James kind of saying, he was actually a really weird kid. Like, we'd go out and play tip the donkey at the neighbor's house, and here's Jesus. He sat inside our house, and he would just read the Torah from the time he woke up to the time he went to bed. And then he'd always run around at us and always be saying, like, I'm the Son of God, I'm the Son of God. And we would just give him a wedgie every single time that he did that. Like, Jesus is kind of weird to grow up with. At some point again, James figures out, after the resurrection of Jesus, who he is, that he's the Messiah, and he begins to be a follower of Christ. In fact, not only is he a follower of Jesus, but he takes over sort of this lead role within the church that had started there in Jerusalem that we read about in the book of Acts. And so that gives us sort of an idea of exactly who is writing this particular book. Now, let's look at the writing itself. And so let's look at the very first verse in chapter 1 of James. It says this letter is from James, a slave of God and the Lord Jesus Christ. I am writing to the 12 tribes, Jewish believers scattered abroad, greetings. In the New Testament, we have some letters a guy named Paul writes, and if you look at his letters, they look like letters, they're structured like letters, and they even read like letters. Here is James, who says this letter is from James. Based on the structure, if you've ever read through James before, based on the structure of James, it really is more of a compilation of sayings, teachings, of practical advice. The scholars say are probably from messages, sermons that James had given to the church there in Jerusalem. And so if you read through James, it's more like our modern day social media reels, right? It's like these little snippets that we get that are full of all kinds of practical wisdom that would have made it easy for people to share with others if they were asking questions, or as they were reading through this, they could say, hey, let me take you to this one part where James talks about that one idea. And so these little snippets, scholars think, were taken, compiled, and then put into this particular letter. All right, let me go back to the series. This is a 12-week series. If you've been with us for any length of time, you're like, holy cow, I don't think we've ever done a 12-week series. And you're right, since I've been here, we have not. We're breaking it into 3 smaller series, okay? If your attention span is like mine, that's helpful. The first one's going to be 5 weeks, and then I think it's 4 weeks and 4 weeks. That might not add up to 12, but who cares right now? But it's 12 weeks. But the reason we're doing that is because of the way James is written. If you read James, it's like he's talking about this, and he's over here talking about this, and he's over there talking about this, and he comes back to this thing. It feels like it's kind of all over the place. And so we're taking these main themes and really compiling them together. And so if you're thinking, oh, we read through this today, then next week we must be reading the next part of James. No, don't even try that, okay? Because that's not what we're going to be doing. We're going to be compiling these sayings, these teachings that fit together in these themes, and breaking this into 3 smaller themes, or 3 smaller series, and sort of this bigger series at hand. All right? All right, that gives you a little bit of structure there. We know this was a letter full of these snippets. Who is he writing to? Back to verse 1. I'm writing to the 12 tribes, Jewish believers scattered abroad. The word scattered there is the word diaspora. If you're familiar with Jewish history, you may have heard that word before. We have 3 instances of this happening through Scripture where they are scattered from their homeland. Twice in the Old Testament, when the Assyrians come in, the Babylonians come in, take over parts of Israel. They take them as prisoners. They send them to their homeland, and so they are scattered, right? They're scattered from where they are from to these new places. The scattering that we find here in James is actually from persecution. It wasn't that someone came in and took over their land. It was because here were these people who at one time were fully Jewish, now believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and so they become followers of Jesus. We probably call them Jewish Christians. They are following Jesus, and now they have this persecution that's happening by their own people. Religious leaders coming in and like, hey, no, Jesus isn't the Messiah. Jesus isn't the one that you're supposed to be following. And so there's a persecution that is happening. And so these Jewish Christians are running, getting away as far as they can from Jerusalem and their own people. So that gives us an idea of who he's writing to. This letter is going out to them to speak to where they are. And that leads us into what we're going to talk about today in verse 2. Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. Look at that again. It says, when troubles of any kind comes your way. Notice what he doesn't say. If. James doesn't say if troubles come your way, if adversity happens in your life, if there's trials, if there's pain. He says when this happens in your life. I mean, we can look around at our own lives and say, yep, that's true, right? My guess is that every single one of us in this place have faced trials adversity, we've struggled, there's been troubles, whatever it may be, that we've experienced that before in our life. We know it's not if these things are going to happen, it's when these things are going to happen. And so when James says, when trouble comes your way, like we understand that. We get that because we've experienced that in our own life, or honestly, we might be in the midst of it right now in our life. It's not if, but when. So if we know that's coming, how do we deal with it? Look at the rest of verse 2. When troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. I don't know about you, when I think about adversity, trouble, trial, suffering, joy always comes to mind, right? Hey, I had the flesh-eating disease. Thank you, Jesus. I just filed for bankruptcy today. Woohoo, Jesus is king, right? We're excited about that. Hey, my team just traded the number one best defensive player in the game. Give me more suffering, God, right? That's kind of the things that we love. I mean, isn't that true for you? Like when you have adversity, you have struggles, you have troubles or trials in your life, you always think of joy, right? No, we don't think about that. Because for us, joy and suffering, joy and troubles, they're not compatible. These are two very, very different ideas. So let me talk about joy for a moment. I think joy is often misused. Because I think for many people, they believe joy means happiness. And happiness and joy are actually two different things. Let me quickly explain these. Happiness is external and circumstantial. Happiness is like watching your football team play today and they go up by 2 with a minute left in the game, right? You're excited, you're ecstatic, you're happy. There's this emotion that is there that you're feeling like, hey, we've got this. But here's the deal with happiness. Happiness is often short-lived, temporary, and reactive. The other team goes down the field in that last minute, no time left on the clock, or second left, we'll say. They kick a field goal and win the game. You're not happy anymore, are you? In fact, you're probably grabbing your TV and slamming it to the ground because there's so much anger that you have about what happened here. That's what happiness is. It's external and it's circumstantial. Joy is internal. And joy is enduring. Joy isn't dependent on some external focus or factors in our life. We can be joyful even when we're going through suffering. We can be joyful when we're going through difficult times. We can be joyful, get this, even when we're sad. That even when we are experiencing sadness, we can also experience joy. Like joy comes from the sense of purpose and meaning. It's external, it's enduring, that you can still have joy watching football even though your team doesn't win a game this whole year, okay? That's the difference between joy and happiness. And here is James who says, in the midst of your troubles, find joy. That no matter how hard life may be, no matter what kind of adversity you're facing, suffering that's going on, be full of joy in your tough times. Who's he writing to? He's writing to these Jewish Christians who are really suffering. Like they don't know what to do. What are we supposed to do with this suffering? And everything we're experiencing right now, we've never been through this before. What are we supposed to be doing here? And here is James that says, I know you've left everything. You've left your homeland, you've left friends, you've left family, you've left jobs, you've moved to these new places, you're being persecuted for what you believe. Oh, by the way, in the midst of this, find this joy. Find this joy in your life. Now, why would this be important? Look at verse 3. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. When you go through adversity, suffering, pain, trials, tough times in life, what's produced in you? What do you tend to do when those moments come in your life? Well, if you're like most people, we don't handle it very well at all. And in fact, what these troubles tend to produce in us are things like bitterness, hate, cynicism, blame. We have less reliance on God. Because when trouble comes into our life, we want to blame everything and everyone else. Stephen Range wrote a book, a commentary on James. He says this, about this passage. He says, instead of having a negative view of trials as though they are some kind of punishment, James urges us in an unexpected direction, considering them pure joy based on the important role they play in our growth. Here's James who's kind of pushing back on what most people would say to experience in this moment. He says, find joy in this suffering through Jesus. Don't let these trials in your life hinder your faith. Don't let them separate you from God, but grow in your faith as you experience them in your life. James actually uses a very unique word here in verse 3. It's the word tested. We only find it 3 other times in Scripture, 2 in the Old Testament and 1 other time here in the New Testament. But the Greek word that's used here is actually for the smelting process. For all of you non-smelters out there, let me kind of explain this. It's when raw material known as ore is taken and it's broken into really small pieces, and then this reducing agent is added to it, and then there's intense pressure from heat is from blast furnaces are just put on this broken up ore. Through this process, all the terrible metals, the stuff you don't want, they separate, and so you're able to throw those out. But what's left are the precious metals. The metals like copper and silver and bronze and gold. And so here's James who's kind of painting this picture for his audience. He says, when you face trials and troubles and suffering and adversity, he's like, get smelted, okay? Somebody first service said, I couldn't see it, I was sitting in the back, I thought it said get smelled. He's like, I didn't understand get smelled. It's smelted, okay? Get smelted. He's like, hey, when you're going through these difficult times in your life, let there be this smelting process for your soul. Douglas Moo said this about this term here in James. He says, suffering is a means by which faith, tested in the fires of adversity, can be purified and thereby strengthened. Maybe some of us need to be smelted. Maybe some of us need to be smelted so our faith can strengthen and grow. Maybe our relationship with Jesus needs to go through the smelting process. Maybe the bitterness that we carry deep down needs to go through the smelting process. Maybe the blame you're putting on other people for things that are happening in your life. Maybe you need to go through that smelting process. Maybe the health issues that you have and keep coming up, maybe they need to go through that smelting process too. That in the end, the trials, the suffering, the adversity we faced, that through this smelting process of our soul, through this reliance on God in those tough times, that what we can actually find is the precious metal, right? That we can be strengthened and our faith can grow. See, when we go through that process, it brings what James talks about here. It brings this perseverance. It brings this endurance. It helps to build us into this mature follower of Jesus. It smelts away, right, the unprecious metals, the metals that nobody wants, the things that we're trying to get rid of. It smelts away our bitterness. It smelts away our hate. It smelts away our self-loathing, our cynicism, our blame. That through this smelting process of our souls, that we are being turned into something beautiful and way, way more valuable. And we are growing into the people that God intends for us to be and has created us to be. Tim Keller was a pastor and author. He said, suffering can turbocharge the ordinary process of Christian growth. How does that happen? Well, as we go through this process of us being smelted, right, our soul is being smelted, it equips us to be a good husband, a good wife, a good child, a good mom, a good dad, a good woman, a good man, a good boyfriend, a good girlfriend, a good fiance. It equips us to be a good boss, to be a good employee, to be a good friend, to be a good human. It equips us to be a good follower of Jesus. How does this happen? Well, through the pressures that we are facing, through the trials that we are going through, and if we have this reliance on God, we learn to understand ourselves better. That through the fires that we face in life, we begin to know our limitations. And over time, if we allow ourselves to be smelted, right, our souls to be smelted, we will make better decisions, better choices. We will listen better. We'll respond healthier to people that are important to us in our lives. Like our faith will grow stronger. Our faith will grow, even though it may be painful to go through that. If we've got this reliance on God, and we can get rid of the anger and the bitterness and the hate that we have, God can do amazing things in our lives that will grow and strengthen our faith. Well, this is a practical book. Does James actually give us anything practical we can do with this? And he does in verse 5. It says, if you need wisdom, ask your generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. I think this verse gets misused quite a bit, especially in the world of education, where we are like in high school, middle school, college, maybe doing a PhD, whatever it may be, and like you forget to study or you just decide not to study for a test. You're like, well, I remember this passage in James chapter 1, verse 5. It says, if you need wisdom, just pray for it, and God will give it to you generously. So like, man, God, I need help. I didn't do this. I was supposed to study, and I didn't do it. So give me this wisdom that I need to pass this test. That is not what James is talking about here, okay? He is talking about something very, very different. He says, when you are suffering and you're struggling and you're facing adversity, when you need to be smelted, your soul needs to be smelted, he says, pray for wisdom from God. He doesn't say, blame other people, raise your fist at God, post your hateful thoughts online, walk around full of bitterness. That's not what he says. He says, pray. Pray for that wisdom. Pray that God will give you the wisdom that you need in those tough moments to give you strength through the adversity that you're going through, that you're facing. Pray for God to give you the endurance you need, however long the suffering lasts. And I hate to be a downer. Hey, look, sometimes the suffering we face could be our whole life. And maybe that process is something we continually have to go through. But pray to God for wisdom to walk down that path. Pray for God to show you what being smelted in you, what God wants to change in you, what God wants to transform in you through this process. Pray and seek wisdom from God. And James says it here. He says, and God will give you that wisdom in your tough times. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, that sounds great. I got something going on right now. I'm going to go home and pray about it. Tomorrow, God's going to give me this answer, right? God's going to give me this wisdom. Everything's going to be wonderful. Well, like the great Lee Corso liked to say, not so fast, my friends. There's a little bit more here. That wisdom could come quickly, but many times it doesn't. Many times it takes time to go through this. That means being patient with God, for God to answer those prayers. And oftentimes what I have found, it's not actually God speaking to me, it's God speaking through someone else in my life. Now, not the person who gives you unsolicited advice, okay? You know those people, like you got something going on, and they're like, hey, let me help you with that, and let me tell you what I did, or what I read in this book, or I saw on the internet, let me help you with this. And it's like, no, that's not what I want. I don't want unsolicited advice. I want someone who cares about me. I want somebody who knows me and loves me. We're going to talk about this in a few weeks, but James says, be quick to listen and slow to speak. Like that's the person I want in my life to help me through the troubles and trials that I'm facing in my life. I want that person to walk this path with me. I'm going to pray that God will give me wisdom as I'm going through this trouble in my life. But I want this person to be there with me, to listen to me, to speak only when they feel like it's time to speak, but to be praying for me too, to be praying with me through this. And many times that's how I find I get the wisdom that I'm asking for from God. But all of that begins with prayer. But there's a warning here too. Verse 5. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world, and they are unstable in everything they do. Here's James who says, hey, when you're seeking this wisdom, don't go all over the place trying to find answers to this. He's like, put your faith, put your reliance on one thing, put it on God. He, in this translation, says, don't be divided. Other translations say double-minded. It's believed that this is actually the first time in Greek literature that that word had ever been used, this term divided or double-minded. What does that mean? It's like saying, hey, I'm a Cowboys fan, but I pull for the Commanders too, okay? You can't do both of those things. Very opposite of each other. That person is double-minded. They're not stable. They're sick. Run away from them as quickly as you can. But see, you're laughing, so you understand exactly what I'm talking about. James says, hey, our attitude with God should be that we should be focused only on God. That we should be looking for answers in all these different places, that our focus should be on God, that we shouldn't waffle, that we should have this single-mindedness on God in our lives. That God should be our focus. I think Jesus probably said this best. He's asked one day, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your minds. Like that's the single-mindedness, right? That's being focused on one thing. That's being focused on God. And James is saying the same thing. Don't waffle. Don't be double-minded, but be focused on God. Let this single-mindedness be exactly who you are. Let your focus be on Jesus. If we live this way, what's the outcome? Well, we actually find the outcome a little bit later on. I told you about how there's these snippets here. It's in chapter 1, verse 12. James says, God blesses those who patiently endure testing and temptation. Afterward, they will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. Back in 2018, there was a documentary called Free Solo. It's about a guy named Alex Honnold, and he is a very experienced mountain climber, and he was making an attempt to be the first person to successfully climb El Capitan in Yosemite National Park. That's this 3,000-foot, basically straight up and down granite face, and no one else had done it this way. When I say free solo, it means he was attempting to climb this mountain with no ropes, all right? Like the only thing he had to hold him up was his body. July 3rd, 2017, he starts out at the bottom of this mountain, and for the next 3 hours and 56 minutes, very methodically and slowly, he made his way up to the top and made it, again, with no ropes. Now, how do you do that, right? Maybe some of you do some kind of mountain climbing. Well, you know it's about a firm foundation that at any given point in time, except for a few rare instances, like at least 3 parts of your body need to be touching that mountain so that you don't fall. That's why mountain climbers will move pretty methodically and slowly to make sure those 3 pieces of contact are there. And when they move their hand to another space, they do it slowly, making sure that the step they're taking is the right step. And then they do that with their feet. And so it's this, again, the slow process of making it up this mountain. But you've got this firm foundation, as best you can, up against this rock so you don't fall. Here in this verse, James uses this word endure. We actually read it back at the beginning of this morning, and it's this Greek term, steadfast. And it means nothing can move you. That you are anchored in, that your foundation is deep, that you're not going anywhere. And if you are doing it sort of methodically, right? You are so steadfast in where you are that the moves you make will be things that you've thought about and you've prayed about, that you're taking your time because you are steadfast in this place that you are. The things that you're facing in life that may be tough and hard, you are ready for them. Because this foundation that you have is so steadfast. And this foundation that you have will allow you to get beyond the troubles in your life. It'll get you to the place where you can actually climb those mountains that you're facing. That again, you can endure the trouble, the adversity, the trials that come your way. When we do this, when we're steadfast, when prayer is a part of who we are, when we endure the smelting process for our souls that so often we face, what James says here in verse 12 is that we get to experience an amazing victory. Right? He says there's this spiritual success that is given to us by the creator of all things, the thing that created us, God, that there's this incredible success that is there if we are able to endure through these trials in our life. But as James says, that only happens when our foundation is strong. That only happens when our foundation is anchored in Jesus. And if we are able to do this with this focus on Christ, then no matter what we face in our life, we'll be able to handle it. But I also believe, we go back to the very beginning, I also believe we can do it with this incredible amount of joy. Because we know this isn't the end. We know there's something greater waiting for us. But here's the deal. We have to take small steps to get there. We can't hope that the end is coming. We can't wish this away. We have to take these small steps to get there. I was reading something not too long ago. It was a Navy SEAL, and he was talking about why most people who attempt to be a Navy SEAL don't make it through. I think it's the third or fourth week of training, and they call it Hell Week. It's 5.5 days, and through those 5.5 days, these SEALs are experiencing extreme sleep deprivation, constant physical training. They're working through cold and wet conditions like all the time. There's psychological pressures that are there. And as he's describing this, he says the reason that most people don't make it through that week has nothing to do with how strong you are, has nothing to do with how intelligent you are. The reason so many fail is they can't wait for the week to be over. That when the week begins, they're already thinking about, contemplating, dreaming about the end of the week. He says, you want to know the people who make it through that tough week? He says, it's the ones who wake up each day and focus on making it to breakfast if they got to sleep the night before. They focus on breakfast, then they focus on lunch, then they focus on dinner. Like there's these small steps. They know the end's coming, but they're not focused on that. They're focused on the moment and where they are right now in their lives. And the thing that they're facing as they go through that week. As we start this series and as we talk about this topic today, I want to leave you with this challenge. What's the trial? What's the trouble? What's the adversity? What's the suffering that you're going through in your life right now? And somewhere maybe you write this down. You just name what that is. And I'm guessing if you're going through it, you know exactly what that is right now. But here's the other piece of this. And instead of wishing it away, instead of hoping it's going to be over with quickly, think about what's one small step that you can do today that will get you to tomorrow. And tomorrow, what's the next small step you can take that will get you into the day after that? Because look, here's the deal. When we face trials, when we face suffering, like we're going through this smelting process in our soul, if we're trying to follow God, and it's hard. But if we can do that, God will refine us. God will bring out the precious metals in us, the person he has created us to be. And we get to experience those amazing blessings that James talks about here. Let's just not read this play from James's playbook today, but let's put it into practice as we prepare for this game called life.